Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Silver Mont, and this is a review of Far Cry Primal on the PlayStation 4. First up, a quick summary and disclaimer, and if you'd rather skip this and get right into the review, click here. I received a digital review copy of Far Cry Primal through a partner program known as Octoly. I received no compensation, monetary or otherwise, from the publisher or any third parties. The only real condition was including a link to the product in the video description, which you can see down below. Now, as for the actual game, I played for around 12 hours and completed the main set of missions. Total completion was around 40%. I played on the default difficulty setting. My history with the franchise, I played some Far Cry and Far Cry 2, but that's about it. Why did I decide to review Primal? Because, I thought it would be nice to just try reviewing something for a change on a fairly tight schedule, so there's that, and I happen to have some free time. But let's get started. Let's talk Far Cry Primal. The basic premise is a Far Cry game set 10,000 years ago. No guns, no cars, no modern technology. Instead, we're thrown into a survival sandbox action-adventure game. That's the best way I can think to describe it, at any rate. So what is the basic gameplay like? You will explore the open world, gathering materials to craft weapons and tools, conquering outposts to fill out the map, and partaking in missions and smaller side quests, all with the ultimate goal of uniting your tribe who are scattered across the valley. That's about it for the story too. From the very start of the game, the importance of working as a team to hunt and survive is driven into you. Spoilers, but your hunting party is quickly slaughtered and you are left alone in a harsh world. Sometime later, you find another member of your tribe, and the two of you set upon the goal of gathering the scattered, lost, and captured members of your tribe and building up a village. Unfortunately, that doesn't really come across in the actual gameplay, wherein you have very little interaction with your tribe outside of talking to some of them to get missions. You will only fight with them on a handful of occasions, and generally you're just a one-man wrecking crew, as is the norm for video games, I suppose. Of course, you're not entirely alone. A large part of Far Cry Primal would be the primal beasts of the land. You'll find eagles, wolves, bears, but the selling point, as evidenced by their presence on the game cover, would of course be the mammoths and saber-toothed tigers. You can hunt a relatively vast number of beasts for their meat and hides, and you can also tame some of them, essentially turning it into your pet, your faithful companion that fights by your side, and in some cases even lets you ride it around. As far as moment-to-moment gameplay, you could probably compare the game a little to Elder Scrolls. It's in first person, and only first person, and you'll be fighting mostly with melee weapons, but also with a few ranged weapons like a bow and some throwing knives and the like. There's also a stealth system in play too. But that out of the way, let's talk first about what I didn't like about the game, the aspects that I felt didn't work or could work better, before moving on to the positive. And I'm going to start my list of dislikes with something very nitpicky, and perhaps petty, but whenever the game transitions into a cutscene, the screen fades to black entirely. It's basically telling you that it's cutscene time. I know that's not really a big issue, but it breaks immersion for me. It causes a disconnect between the gameplay and the story, and I don't think it's too much to ask for these days, especially in a first-person game. A lot of games are able to manage seamless transitions from gameplay into cutscene, and they are particularly nice in a game that never changes perspective and remains in first-person all the time. Next up, the language. So far as I'm aware, the language spoken in the game is fictional. It's made up. I've not checked, but I'm almost positive that the player character is voiced by the same guy who voiced Adam Jensen in Deus Ex. He has a very distinct voice, shall we say. Now, this isn't really a problem, so to speak, but at times the language sounds bizarre and you can tell that it's somebody speaking a made-up language, where it basically sounds like goo-ga-ga-ga-gi-ga, goo-ga-gi-boo-goo-gi-ba, and it just sounds dumb. But at other times it sounds really natural and you can believe that it was, like an ancient language. That's the issue though, it isn't consistent. Sometimes you believe you're hearing this ancient language and other times you go, why is this person with a very notable accent just making stupid noises? Like, is it intentionally meant to be funny? Because there's one character who I'm pretty sure is meant to be comic relief and shall we say, a reference to other Far Cry characters, but I don't know, it bugged me a little bit. Next up, another nitpicky complaint. Last one, I promise. The day to night transitions, they're so fast. Like, it goes from pitch black to completely bright in the span of a few seconds. What's up with that? If you're playing on PC, there'll probably be a way to adjust that, either by, I don't know, configuring the like ini file or like a mod, but it's not a deal breaker. It hardly even matters. But you might have noticed though, all three of these complaints so far have been related to immersion, because this is the sort of game you need to immerse yourself in. The gameplay isn't fantastic, but it is an immersive experience, so everything should be done to keep you immersed, shall we say. It's the game that wants you to be immersed in its world, so, you know, all three of these issues are fairly easy to solve. Right, so now I've got to move on to the gameplay. As an overall package, there's nothing wrong with Far Cry Primal's gameplay. The mechanics of using the bow and melee weapons, they're fine, you know? The running, climbing, jumping mechanics. As a package, it works. But here's the kicker. It was very hard for me to enjoy the moment-to-moment gameplay. It's not like I found myself wanting to fight more or to climb more. It's like when a fight happens, oh okay, yeah, that's that. First-person melee isn't very interesting at the best of times, especially if you only have one attack at your disposal. Well, you can attack or you can charge up an attack, but that's pretty much it. Compare with, say, I don't know, Dark Souls or Ninja Gaiden for melee. These are games immensely satisfying simply to play. You know? It's just one of those things, and it could be subjective, it could just be me. But I like a game where you fight enemies and it feels good, it feels fun just to play. Far Cry Primal doesn't have that. But yes, it's subjective. It isn't that I hated playing, but I did find myself thinking now and then, this isn't actually fun either, it's just fine. It works. But is that okay? Should we not strive to make games that can be fun and satisfying even in the smallest of ways? Especially in the smallest of ways. I feel like Far Cry focused too much on the bigger picture, the immersive experience, the visuals, all of that. They focus on everything apart from the gameplay, which is very mediocre. And Far Cry Primal feels quite formulaic. If you've played an open world game in the past 5 years, then you probably know what's going on here. It has the survival crafting elements that everything has to have after Minecraft. Although a few hours into the game you'll be swimming in meat. That sounds a little bizarre, but you'll have so much meat that you won't need any more meat. You won't need to scavenge to survive or anything like that, even though the game starts off being like, oh, you need to find food and shelter and a fire and all that. I'm even seeing Assassin's Creed elements here and there. It feels like Ubisoft's games have a lot of overlap in some ways, like Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, Watch Dogs, probably The Division. Is that even Ubisoft? I think it is. They all feel like they have similar elements, and I don't like that, personally. I'm not sure if it's a good thing. Far Cry 2 fascinated me years ago when it came out, as the game was full of new technology that was, like, really cool at the time to me. But then, since Far Cry 3, I think they've been trying something else. They're selling a game not based on its new, exciting gameplay features, but, well, they're selling the game with good marketing. Far Cry 3 was hugely successful, and I believe that was less to do with the qualities of the game. I'm not saying it was a bad game, I'm just saying I think it sold because of its marketing, and the marketing relied heavily on just having cool moments. I mean, you remember how Far Cry 3 was revealed? There was like virtually no gameplay, and the gameplay wasn't very interesting. It was basically just a super scripted moment. Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity, etc.? It was memorable, but is that enough? I think Far Cry Primal might suffer from that. I've not seen too much of the marketing. In fact, the only thing I saw about Far Cry Primal prior to playing it were the opening minutes that they must have demoed at E3 or somewhere. And it feels like that's enough these days. Focus on a highly scripted, impressive 5-minute sequence and sell your entire game on it. I'm not saying the game is lying or lackluster or anything like that, but yeah, the opening is pretty much like ultra scripted and then the rest of the game is not. And I don't know, something about that seems a little off to me. I don't like the idea of marketing a game on one specific section of the game that is not necessarily representative of the whole experience. Does that make sense? In the end, it feels like they had a cool idea, caveman game, but then they didn't really know what to do with it. Mission and enemy variety is also a little lacking. In fact, the missions are predictable. In fact, sometimes they're so predictable you know exactly what is going to happen as soon as the mission starts. That's not a good thing, and there are only really two variety of human enemies, and they don't need any thought or care into how you approach them, because outside of one enemy, like a boss, you can basically just walk up to every single enemy in the game and just clobber them to death. Maybe you can't do that on the higher difficulty settings, I don't know, but, you know, I was playing on default, and all that would mean that it's on high difficulty, they just like one-shot you, so you have to dance around them more, but you know, it doesn't really fundamentally change anything how much damage an enemy does. Even hunting the animals doesn't need any real thought or specific strategy. If it works on a wolf, it will work on a mammoth for the most part. I mean, that's not a giant issue, but considering what a large part of the game it is, I feel like maybe it should feel unique to hunt a mammoth compared to a wolf or a badger. Just saying. But you know, it's functional though. And let's move on to the more positive aspects now. The main one, of course, being the game's presentation. I was playing on PS4, which I believe is native or close to 1080p, and it ran at 30 frames per second. Performance-wise, I didn't notice any problems with the frame rate or any visual glitches. In fact, I don't think I came across any glitches other than one enemy who was stuck in a wall, and a few, physics anomalies where I would launch enemies flying hilariously far, but no problematic bugs, which is great. Back to the visuals though. The game is beautiful. I found myself stopping on several occasions throughout my 12 hours just to admire the visuals. The character models are detailed and expressive, and while some of the textures are blurry upon close inspection, that's, you know, that's how it is. That's like in every game pretty much. Even if you're like on a $5,000 PC playing the most intensive game ever, the textures are probably gonna look bad up close if you get really close. But the lighting is really nice. Special note should also be given for the animations too. Human animations are one thing, as you can mocap that pretty easily, but Far Cry also has a lot of really nice animations for the various beasts. In particular, if you sick your tamed pet onto a wild creature, you'll get to see a lot of cool things, such as a saber-toothed tiger jumping up onto a rhino or mammoth to bite through its neck and bring it down. And, you know, I don't know if they, I don't know how they animated that, like if it was through studying like nature documentaries or anything, but it was impressive to me, and if I wonder how they did something, that's generally a good thing, you know? It's like, wow, how did they do that? That's really cool. And whilst the enemy variety can be a little bland, the world itself feels varied enough to keep you interested for the duration of the game, even if it's a little, predictable. It's like, oh, if I go north, it's going to turn all snowy, but it's a nice looking game, and it was generally pretty fun to explore the world. Traversing is never too irritating either. You can slide down like almost vertical slopes, so you don't really need to worry too much about getting down from, high up quickly, though you might run into the funny situation of like jumping down a cliff and busting your ankles out, but then when you heal, your character just pulls an arrow out of their arm or rubs some salve onto their arms. I feel at this point they keep it in just because it's funny, like the infamous drowning in Far Cry 2 and then healing yourself by like pulling an arrow out of your body or something. It's weird, but it's funny, so it's not really a problem. It's like the corpse physics in Dark Souls. It's stupid, but hilarious. Whilst I mentioned the missions earlier, I do have to point out there are a few missions in the game that are extremely cool. This is both a good thing and a bad thing. It's good because they are fun, and some are so bizarre that it makes you want to talk about them. Like, it's always fun to have something crazy you can talk about your friends with. But it's also a bad thing, because there aren't very many of them. There's like 2, maybe 3 of those missions in the game. And they kind of tease something that never happens. Like, those missions make you feel like the game is building towards something really dramatic and surreal and epic, as much as that word can be overused, but it never happens. The game just sort of ends, and it's like, oh, is that it? Am I done? That was very anticlimactic. But hey, I think that about sums it up. Far Cry Primal is a fine game. It looks amazing, and I can only imagine how it would look on a PC. That said, it's a fine game. It isn't a standout game. It's not something that you like have to go, oh, you have to go out and play this game. It's amazing. Only the graphics stand out. There's a slight lack of focus in the game, and the story is extremely simple. How much you get out of it will depend on how much of a completionist you are. If you just do the story, you'll probably be done in around 10-15 hours, which is okay. I mean, a lot of the games these days are only like 5 hours long, so, you know, that's a decent length. But if you want to finish everything the game has to offer, you're probably looking at more like 20-30 hours, and I imagine there'll be DLC in the future. But yeah, it's a fine game. If you have any questions, leave them down below in the comments and I'll answer ASAP. What would I rate Far Cry Primal? A little above average, I suppose. It's a very average game for the most part. Would I recommend it? If you enjoy open world games, then yes. It might not cook you right away, as the game starts off fun, and then becomes a little boring, until it ramps up more and more until the ending. But then the actual ending, as I said earlier, is kind of a letdown. So yeah, it's not a bad game, it is a fine game. But is that really all we want from games? For them to be fine? Don't we want something that, you know, stands out in every aspect? Maybe. Maybe not. In the end, give it a shot, see what you think. Either way, thank you so much for watching, and I hope this review was helpful in some ways. See you next time.